Hi.
Hey, Artie. How are you
Hey,
doing,
Linda.
man?
It's great to see you. I'm so glad we're having this chat. I'm so
Yeah.
excited.
Well,
How are you doing? You're in Alberta, right?
yeah. Well, no, I actually am in a holiday in BC. My parents are here, and I came up to see them. And so, hence, we have a nice, beautiful lake behind me. And
It-
you're going to hear the odd power boat, plane, train, automobile, cart going by. I hope it's not too distracting.
oh, it's going to distract me because I'm going to wish I was there. But
Yeah.
I'm in Ontario.
Yeah.
It's been rainy today, and I worked a long
Oh
shift.
gosh,
The
that's
opposite state of mind.
awful. It's like the opposite. Yeah.
So it's lovely to see you. At least I can vicariously be
Yeah,
there.
just I thought I'd put the scene behind me so you could just kind of take a deep breath and let it all out.
And it's good to be in such a relaxing atmosphere with such um, a topic that can be sometimes
Yeah,
not so relaxation inducing.
yeah, exactly, man.
So
Exactly.
Linda here, to our viewers who, if there are any who don't already know who Linda is a champion athlete, track and field athlete. Is that right?
Yes,
Uh,
I used to be, not anymore.
yeah, tell us. Okay, tell us
So
you.
yeah, I'll tell you about my life. Grew up in South America, and started playing soccer in the streets. Then got to track and field when I realized I couldn't play soccer with the boys anymore. And then I made the Bolivian national team. And then by 15, I came back to Canada. A couple years in high school, got recruited to the NCAA, Title IX. Thank you, Title IX. Got my scholarship. Graduated from University of Maryland as a team captain and terrapin. And then I decided to try to train for the Canadian Olympic team. And so I came back up, and I took my master's degree in the University of Saskatchewan, where it was an Olympic training center for heptathlon, which was my event. And so made the national team. Didn't quite make it to the Olympics that year. There's a lot of reasons for that. But that was the year Ben Johnson got nabbed for doping. So yeah, I spent a few years on the team with everybody there, and got some insights into cheating in sports and doping. And then I thought, I left the sport, decided to get married, and took a PhD from Simon Fraser University in kinesiology. And the person that I married, Alberta farm boy, he had a vision to go to Africa, work internationally in tropical agriculture. He got his PhD through McGill. So all of a sudden I found myself on the edge of the Sahara Desert,
Wow.
trying to figure out what was this about. I left the sport with a little bit of a chip on my shoulder, thinking, people just cheat all the time. And what am I going to tell if I ever coach anybody? What am I going to tell young people? What it is it worth it, and why did I do it? And then I started realizing I did it just because I loved it. I had to find a different reason, a good reason why I love sport. And in the meantime, I'd had my PhD, so I go down to the local university. This is actually the place in Nigeria where they have Boko Haram. It's a Center for Islamic Studies. And so my very first professorship was in the Center for Islamic Studies.
Really?
And I was teaching phys ed. So because I was there, all of a sudden I got recruited by the World Athletics to go into Islamic countries. They figured I must have some expertise working in that environment. So I had to start going to Islamic countries, teaching women how to coach the girls. And so I kind of did a whole circuit there. And I went to Tehran in 1995. Like, I just did a bunch of really cool things, and things that people it blew their minds. Like, why are you doing this? Like, it's crazy. So I had to wear the veil, hijab, and so, I had to go in and do things, and started getting insight into, just people's ideology and what makes people do the things they do, and put restrictions on women. And so all that's in my background. And then I come back to Alberta because my husband's father had passed away. We wanted to be close to the farm. And all of a sudden I found myself in Edmonton. I didn't know anybody. And anyway, so then I just started doing sport performance coaching, trying to combine my track and field knowledge for speed development, power, with the, with my kinesiology. And So then I was lucky. I got hooked up with the Edmonton Oilers, worked a little bit with hockey team on speed development. Then I started working with athletes in all different sports because it seemed like what I had to give, people needed. Like if you were a hockey player, you want to be faster. If you're a figure skater, you want to jump higher. So all of these things. So I started, by now I've coached athletes in almost 17 different sports. I believe it's more than that. Wow. And just helping them to get better as an athlete. And so, you know, the culmination of all this is, you know, as you get older, and I'm almost 60, so you get to a stage where you suddenly have these leadership roles. And I was elected president of Athletics Alberta. And then in that role, I think I was elected in 2014. So in that role, by 2018, I had to serve on a gender committee, and didn't know what that was really about, but I was the only female president of a province at that point. So they had to put a female president. Of all the presidents of the provinces, they had to put a female president on the gender committee. And then I ran into this gender ideology and people self-identifying into sport. And it's like all my background, sports, leadership, women in sport, ideology, everything just like,
yeah, I was just gonna say, like, as you're telling the story, I'm thinking, oh, that's a route into, like, you're an athlete, you're concerned with fairness in sport because of the doping scandals of the 80s. Yeah. This is bringing that right back again. You're concerned about women's rights and how this empowers women because you've been in places where, and you've seen dangerous ideologies that undermine women's rights. Like, it's all there. It's incredible.
And then, so it all kind of came crashing in on me. I'm sitting in my basement in the middle of winter, this, you know, January 2018, looking at this new Canadian sport policy, thinking, are you freaking kidding me? Like, what is this? And it means that, like, you know, male bodies can be in female sports. How is that fair? Like, that's even worse than doping. It's worse because they've grown up with a genetic predisposition advantages. As I studied in my PhD, I mean, my PhD is in human biology. And
you know all the many differences, the fundamental differences.
But you know what, honestly, Artie, you would not even have to do that to understand there's a difference between males and females. I mean, just look at the world record. I mean, it's a no-brainer, really.
I honestly, I was going to crack a joke at the beginning of this video that, like, well, it's very obvious that males are different than females. Okay, we're done. Bye. You know, it's like a 30-second video. Why do we have to go into any of this detail?
You know what? I found myself so many times in the last 2 years asking myself, why am I even having to make this argument? Why? It's like we've gone back, you know, a billion years and we're asking the question all over again. Why have sex? What's the difference? What's the difference between male and female? Like, what are we really starting all over again? I don't know. It really blows my mind. And what, you know, the most disappointing thing for me, well, there's two disappointments for me in Canada. The first thing is, when I looked at where the document came from, you know, promoting transgender, like just full acceptance, like no surgery, no even no hormonal treatment necessary, just self-ID, and you can, if you're a male athlete, but you really feel like you're a woman, just say so and you can just compete and everybody will be happy. And, you know, and so that policy came from the entity, Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sport, that was the governing body or the bureaucratic body that was created after the Dublin inquiry, after Ben Johnson got caught, and it was supposed to be the anti-doping body.
Wow.
And so between 2003, so it became Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sport in 2003, and by the time we got to about 2015, all in those years, there was no mention of transgender anything. It was just focusing on how many doping tests, keeping all the sports honest. It was all about that. They were supposed to be the champions of fairness in sport. And all of a sudden, this was the entity that was telling us we're supposed to accept male bodies in female sport. And it kind of blew my mind because it felt like none of the lessons had been learned ever. We're starting over again there. And then when they put out their policy document, Artie, it was just supposed to be a proposal. But then it seemed like overnight, all of the Canadian sport bureaucracy just accepted it, like that's going to be our new policy. And the one that was most disappointing there was the the entity that's supposed to take care of women in sport, Canadian Association for the Advancement of Women in Sport cause, they were the ones now, the women of cause who were supposed to be, representing Canadian women in sport. The cause women were the ones running around the country doing the seminars for trans inclusion. And I was, of course, party to some of those meetings because as president, I have to sit on policy meetings. And with my background in kinesiology and PhD and my background in sport and everything, and of course, all of us have sport backgrounds, but we're sitting in a meeting and I'm supposed to be listening to this person talk about the gingerbread, what is it, that gingerbread man or whatever.
Yeah, gingerbread person, of course.
Person. Oh yeah, excuse me. Misgendered the gingerbread person.
That's it, you're canceled.
But okay, so all of that's happening. And I'm just like looking at this thing going, okay, am I in kindergarten again? Like what's going on? And then when I tried to say something, even in the policy meetings, it's like suddenly no room for questions. Just this is what we're going to do. And, it just seemed like we were being gaslit there. And even amongst my own colleagues, we know the difference in track and field. We can all look at the world records or even our national records, and we can see the difference between male and female performances. And everybody acknowledges behind closed doors, oh yeah, you're right. Like there is a difference. It's not fair, but we're just going to have to live with it because that's human rights. And I'm like thinking, well, human rights, like what in the world? Like, sorry about the trust, but what about my rights? What about the rights of the girls I'm coaching? What about, like, do women really have to just be the template that we're just supposed to deny our rights and just accept all of this, like out of the blue, without any questions, without being consulted, without actually really thinking about having any kind of, maybe a decade of trial and error and meetings and negotiations and maybe try to come up with a better solution? Like, why is it all of a sudden women have to do this? Mm-hmm. Absorb this, right?
Not even being consulted, you're just being told.
Not even being really consulted. No, I mean, they're calling these meetings the consultation meetings, but then when you put up your hand, ask a question, like that, I got one question out, and it was being very polite and saying, well, how do you explain the difference in the world records between male and female? And she said, well, that's just socialization. That's just socialization.
Like, how can anybody, I mean, how, it just blows my mind. It blows my mind.
Yeah, and it does.
Even people who are staunch advocates, like who are staunch trans activists.
Right,
There's that awful person, Veronica Ivy, Rachel McKinnon.
Yeah.
Awful person, but they are a philosophy professor.
Yeah.
And their performance review from this year accidentally leaked online. Yeah, and they're all, I don't know the name of the person who sort of oversees a professor, but the person who wrote the review, who was like a staunch activist and was actually for male to female trans people in women's sports, actually told Veronica Ivy, it's your job, if you're going to talk about this subject, you haven't laid down the basic thing, which is a reason why we should have separate sports categories for men and women in the first place. If you think men should be able to compete in women's sports, that you need to establish that right at the beginning, or you need to establish why you don't need to establish that. And you haven't even done that. This is this person's own, this is like the loudest advocate for males and female sports, who's supposed to be a professor, and they're being told by their own boss that they're failing right at the gate.
But you know what? All of us point that out in our sport meetings, and somehow it's politically incorrect, and they're worried. And I can see why, because like, the top bureaucracy in Canada, they really do accept the ideology. So everything has to fit into that ideology. And if you don't go along with the party line, you don't maybe get your grant or your government funding. And all the sports are always competing for government funding. So if we don't toe the party line, then the people at the top, they're the ones worried about the budget. And I get it to some degree. But it was just really frustrating because about a year ago or a year and a half ago, the Minister of Sport at that time, I think it was Christy Duncan. Anyway, she said, it's not for sports to say what a woman is. It's not up to sport to say what a woman is. And
yes, it is. These are female bodies and male bodies. That is literally
the categories. These are the eligibility categories. It's like saying it's not up to sport to say what age you are. So let's have a 12-year-old compete with a 20-year-old. Like what?
Yeah,
like,
or like
it doesn't make any
weight.
sense.
It's not up to the boxing league to say what your weight is. And
well,
what
that's
weight
right. You just let them self-declare. Like, and so if we're going to go into self-declaration, I mean, I always joke about this, but then if that's how far we're going to go with this, then why wouldn't I just sort of jog around, the track, be dead last and say I identify as the gold medalist? Just put me up there on the podium. Like, why? Like, if we're going to be in this make-believe world, then anything goes. Then whoever, maybe I can find a way to claim that I'm the most oppressed person, and then you'll put me on the gold medal part.
Right. It's so great. It offends me too that these people seem to think that we have men's and women's sports for the sake of validating people's feelings. Like girls just want to play with girls and boys just want to play with boys. As if that's the only reason we separate sports into men's and women's categories is because they like to play together. Like, no, we have male sports and female sports because of, sexual dimorphism.
And even if you're trying to sort of use the word inclusion, like these people are feeling oppressed in life and they need our help, and so we're just going to pretend like they belong in your section, that's using sport as therapy inappropriately. Like, if we're supposed to just make some trans woman feel good about themselves by allowing them to come in and compete with the top athletes, then that's basically saying it's no longer, the purpose of sport is no longer to see who's the best female athlete in this particular endeavor. It's basically to say, we're going to use this as our medical, psychosocial therapy session. But it's inappropriate. It's just inappropriate. It's not sport is by nature discriminatory anyway, because only one person wins. Like, you can't say you're coming into and we can't make sport a non-discrimination realm. Like, that's not even a thing, because one person wins and everybody else loses. So if you don't want discrimination, I don't know. It's just a competition. And the thing is, it has to be, you have to stick to a certain series of guidelines or it loses its meaning. Mm-hmm. Like, if I put a 12-year-old with a 18-year-old, and we all know the 18-year-old's going to win, what's the meaning in that 18-year-old beating a 12-year-old? It doesn't mean that they are more talented, or, I mean, there might be completely different technical elements to what they're doing. It just blows your mind, because there's just no way to say there's a meaning to that win, right? Like, and we all, the one thing with sport, it does, in order to have the character building and or sort of the, even for a society at large. Now we see hockey starting up again. Everybody feels better about life because they can watch a hockey game. I mean, there's a certain role that sport plays in society. And it's like, it's a challenge, and it's sort of like, it's a contest, and everybody's interested, but it has to have a meaning. Like, there has to have, the underpinnings of it have to be fair, and the guidelines have to be clear. And we had clear guidelines until 2 years ago. And then what happened? Like, you don't have to fix what's not broken. Like, we have a way, we could have a way of including trans people, but doing it properly and understanding their biological sex. And if they're like diminishing, if there's a diminished testosterone level, maybe we put in another category: males with diminished testosterone, females with enhanced testosterone. If you want to do something completely different, like, we can do other things, but you don't have to oppress women, I don't like that word. You don't have to put all the burden of this therapy session on the female athletes.
Yeah, I don't think there's any thought being put into the female athletes. I think these people are thinking, these poor trans women, where were we going to put them? Put them in the women's category, but they're not thinking about the impact on the women, and they're really treating them like they're props for these trans women's feelings. Like you're saying, like your job is to validate them, but no, your job is to compete in your sport. This is about, it's not about them. So there's just this complete sort of like, what's the word, like male-centric thinking that they're just not. I think a lot of people just aren't taking the impact on female athletes into consideration at all.
Well, you can only come to that conclusion because it seems like they know. I mean, it's amazing how easy it is for my male colleagues at times to just sort of say, well, 1 or 2. What's the difference? How's it going to hurt? It only takes 2 or 3 on a podium, and everybody else gives up. Like it doesn't take a huge number, Artie. It doesn't. Like people will just get discouraged. And I mean, look at what's happening in the NCAA even today and yesterday, and this letter. I don't know if you saw what happened, but
No.
Save Women's Sports had a petition going, like a private letter that they wanted to have a lot of women sign and submit to the NCAA, because the NCAA has the same guidelines as the International Olympic Committee, which are you can identify as the opposite sex. And so if you're a male, you can identify as a woman, and then go into you have to lower your testosterone a bit, but then enter the women's category. And of course, they retain a lot of males, even when they reduce their testosterone, they retain their ability and their advantages, bigger muscles, bigger heart, bigger lungs. I mean, you're not going to chop off a piece of the lung. So you know, so the Save Women's Sports in the U.S. was going to submit this letter to the NCAA, and so they did. They got 309 signatures on this petition. I signed it as an ex-NCAA athlete, and they submitted it. And somebody within the NCAA office leaked it to Outsports, and then yesterday Outsports tried to shame all of the 300 women by going out there and posting the names on Twitter. They just posted all 300 names on Twitter to try to shame us for being anti-trans, which we're actually not being anti-trans. We're being pro-women, right? Like, so you're just trying to gaslight women and say, oh, you're trying to be so mean. No, we're trying to be careful with our category, and we're trying to actually undertake due diligence in saying that this is not a policy that's going to work for us. And we're trying to engage and, again, have a say in a consultation process, you know, in a responsible manner, to say, let's talk about this, because this isn't going to work for female athletes. And so what happens, they leak the letter, and now with some of the women, like, I don't care if my name's out there. I mean, I said, when they pointed out that my name was being, you know, posted on these 300 names in there, basically I just said, yeah, I'm honored. You know, I'm honored to have my name on that. I don't, you know, but there's a lot of women who don't want to lose their jobs. Like, I'm not in that vulnerable position, but there's a lot of women that would be worried about losing jobs or losing friends or losing, you know, maybe positions on teams. There's a lot at stake for some women to have their name put out.
And you don't even know what you'd be losing. You don't know what opportunities you never see, because that never arose. Because, you know, that you never got to see whether you could have had those opportunities, because you've been quietly, you know.
So Martina Navratilova was the top name on that list. And so I went, you know, she and I went to bats for everybody. Said, we're not hiding. I mean, we just, you know, you can put our names out there, but we're happy to have a platform to say, this isn't fair. It's not in any way justified, and it's not it's violating our human rights. So, yeah. I mean, go ahead and try to shame us, you know, but we're here. We don't have anywhere to go. Where are women going to go? Like, we have to stand our ground. We can't do anything else, Artie. Like, it's not like we're trying to be mean, but we have to protect our own interests in sport.
Yeah, and Martina Navratilova is clearly not transphobic.
No.
Her personal trainer was Renee Richards. Do you know who Renee Richards is?
I know a little bit about the background. I mean, I was I was in my prime as an athlete in the 80s, and of course had a great respect for her. You know, because she was also with in that rivalry with Chris Everett back in the day, right? And so I used to watch it on TV quite a bit, and I was aware of that, but it only vaguely. Like, I didn't pay much attention, you know, to the whole. Unfortunately, I didn't look maybe as close as I should have at the time at the gay and lesbian and that whole thing, that issue. I was just, you know, when you're an athlete, just focus on what you're doing. Yeah. And but it's interesting that they're trying to couch this as the next, you know, like as if transphobia is the same as homophobia, and it's just so vastly different, as you yourself can attest. I mean, I mean, maybe you can explain a little bit to me what's the difference again, but I know there's a difference. Like there is a difference there.
Well, gay rights, see, when you enact laws, laws apply to everybody equally.
Yeah.
So let's say an equal marriage law that lets same-sex marriage happen. That means everybody in the country can marry someone of the same sex if they want to.
Right.
Most people just ignore that law because they don't want to. Right? So it doesn't have an impact on that. Right.
Exactly.
When you enact laws around gender recognition, these apply to everybody and they impact everybody personally. If you're telling everybody your definition of a woman has to be different. That means women can't deny men access to their spaces anymore.
Wow. Yeah. Well.
You know? So like gay laws around gay rights impact gays and gays only, and have very minimal impact on other people. There are some circumstances when there's a little bit of conflict there, like the famous religious group who didn't want to bake the wedding cake, that kind of thing. Pretty minimal, but these laws around trans, they affect everybody, you know, because when a male identifies as a woman and they want access to women's things, you know, they're stepping into it. That affects every woman, right?
Yeah.
So these are what's the word, draconian? These are just like massive changes to society, and people don't realize that. People just think gay marriage laws were to help gay people, so trans rights laws will help trans people, but they don't realize in practice what that actually means.
Right. They don't think it through. Like you have to really think it through. Like, what does this mean in practice? Like in reality, what does it mean?
Yeah, and in reality, what it means is it's not just helping trans women in sport, it's affecting all women in sport. It's affecting everybody in sport. Very angry. And also, like, what's wrong with being a trans woman on a male podium, you know? Wouldn't it be, I always thought, before I got involved in all of this, I always would have imagined that a trans woman winning in a men's category would be such a great leap forward for trans rights, because it would show that male-bodied people can wear women's clothes and dress femininely and express their feminine side
any way they want, and still have male bodies and win male championships. And I thought, wouldn't that just smash open the whole world and make everything better for everybody, right? Yeah. And that's what I think. Right. Like, I totally agree. I feel like by forcing this other sort of saying your identity now becomes your biology, that's actually taking away from what the argument they're trying to make in a way, right? Yeah. Because it says, like, if you put, you know, if you put on a dress or some earrings, suddenly you become a different sex, and that I don't know, like and some people say
what it means to be a man, and it diminishes, like, you know, if you're saying you can't be a man if you like wearing, you know, pantyhose, that's ridiculous. That's just diminishing the, you know, it's creating boxes.
I have to acknowledge that, like, I have kids in university, and, you know, they explain, well, mom, like, they're not wearing a dress and then calling themselves a man, or a woman. They're feeling like they're a woman, and then they're putting the dress on. And you know, that's a little bit insulting if you say it like that, or it's insulting if you say, you know, like, why don't you just let the man go into the trans woman go into the men's race wearing a dress? But the thing that I want to get to, though, is that one of the things I've noticed over the last 2 years is that it doesn't seem like every trans person has the same ideology, the same reason for being trans. So there's a lot of different routes to being trans. And what you're going to have happen is you're going to leave it up to sports administrators to try to figure out, are you saying you're a woman because you're really feeling that? I mean, it doesn't really matter anyway, because they're all, we should do the sport on the basis of biology. But even if we went down that road, like the way my colleagues, sort of, some of them are allowing, well, then are you really gonna, if, for example, like, somebody just wants to win a medal and they just want to declare that day, just like you know, in the prisons, a prisoner who's a very dangerous offender knows that it's easier, you get your life gets better if you self-identify as a woman, and you go into a women's prison. Yeah. And it's a field day, because if you're a rapist, then you're surrounded by a lot of women. So, you know, I mean, the motivation to self-declare should be questioned.
Yeah, I mean, and there's 2 ways you can compare that to gay rights too. So people are doing that because there really is one pathway to being gay, and that's just that you were born gay. You can't choose way in, you can't choose the way out. Figure it out. Sometimes it takes longer than others to figure it out, but it's something that's innate that you are, right? And that's just people, we pretty much know that that's just a thing. But that's not the case with trans at all. It's not. There's not one pathway. There's not one way to be trans. You could choose to be trans because you're gay. You don't. You're very feminine, gay, or very masculine, butch lesbian, and you're having trouble fitting in society, and it's easier to switch over, right? Or it could be that you're dissociating because you have PTSD and you just want a new identity. And the easiest way to do that is to just identify as the opposite sex, and that means you're a different person and you escape yourself and your demons. That's one way. Sexual fetish is a huge one, of course, and paraphilia. A lot of people do this because it's extremely sexually charging for them. I think it's the biggest one.
That's scary for women, actually.
Yeah, exactly. These are the kinds of people who are doing this because because they have a high sex drive are exactly the people who should not be in women's changing rooms on those athletic fields,
Well, and of course, Artie, then what we look at in sport isn't just on the field either, because if you, let's say you have a stadium full of people, of course not these days because of COVID, but if you have a stadium full of people and then you would allow, let's say, the male athletes to self-identify as female, as women, no, they're never going to be female, but if you self-identify as a woman or a girl, and then you decide, well, then they're allowed to go into women's locker rooms and the girls' locker rooms, right?
Yeah.
Somebody in the stand, like as soon as we do that, a spectator then says, well, it's open season. I can go in there too. And if anybody stops me, I'll say I identify. I mean, and then how does that stop the possibility of dangerous people? Like we've already had a problem in sports with people that, a number of cases in track and field in the last few years on people who have, been interfering with athletes sexually for years, and people didn't call them on it, and they found out later, and now we're in these big things. So now you have a person who might be a parent, for example, of a child who it might be a male person, but self-identifies as a woman, and then wants to be the chaperone for the girls in the hotel room. I mean, it just goes on and on. Like, it's hard to do the gatekeeping, right? And it just makes it. And our officials, who's the official is going to make this call? Like who's the person who's going to be strong enough to say, I'm not sure about this, or you're not supposed to question now because of C-16, and that's Bill C-16 for anybody who's watching who doesn't understand Canadian law. But it was a bill passed in 2017 saying that it's possible to be charged with discrimination on the basis of gender. Like if you don't acknowledge gender expression or gender identity, you can be accused of being discriminatory on that basis. So people don't really know what that means. So they just assume that, well, it's just the rule now. But no, but we can still make our guidelines. So people not sure what to do with it.
Yeah.
And I think that's exactly what's happening in the prisons. I think that the prison guard or the prison wardens probably know better, but it's their interpretation of Bill C-16. Nowhere in Bill C-16 did it say, if you're a prison warden, you must put a male into a female prison. Nobody said that. But it's how they're interpreting that new law, and everybody's afraid.
Yeah.
So they just do it, right? So I think we're going to lose officials in sport because officials are going to be confused. They're going to be worried. And a lot of our officials are doing it as like a hobby. They love being around the sport. They love being like the timer for the race or measurement in the long jump. They just want to be out there with, contributing to sport in their free time as a retired person. So a lot of our officials are volunteers. And I feel like we're going to have a harder time in the future if these kinds of things continue without clear guidelines. We're going to be putting people in a really weird position where they have to make a judgment call about something they don't even understand. And then they're going to feel bad about it. And they're going to just say to themselves, I can't deal with this in sport. That's not what I signed up for. I didn't sign up to try to draw, make hairline decisions between gender and sex. Like that's not what somebody signed up for in sport. So I feel like it's actually we might have a problem with officials. And if we do, then that's going to impact our ability to host competitions. And it's going to also impact our ability, like that impacts everybody, young and, boys, girls, men, women, Everybody in sport is impacted if people are intimidated to get involved.
Absolutely. How is it with you? You've been very outspoken about this. You've published articles. It's amazing. I'm so glad you're speaking out. Yay.
Yay.
With your like perfect background. It's like,
yeah, well, I mean, it's almost like it chose me. Like, I'm just like,
if
I can't speak to this, if I can't speak to this issue, nobody can, because I've had training in the biology, I've had lots of experience in the sport as a coach, now policies, and I understand religious dogma, fundamentalism. Like, I understand all of this stuff.
Yeah.
And so
now,
really,
what's it been like? What's the reaction been like? Like within your field, you mentioned like it's hard to get into some time.
Locally, see, here's an interesting thing. When the people in the top echelon in Canadian sport make these rules, it actually ends up having to be implemented at the ground level, provincial, local, right? So it's like the IOC, International Olympic Committee, made these rules accepting males into female sports. Then that gets passed down to the national governing bodies. And then the national governing bodies say, well, this is a new rule. Now you people down below who are in the trenches of sport, you're going to have to implement this. So you know what? It's like this massive shift of responsibility downward to the ground level. And they're leaving it up to people like me, because I'm the president of a province, and it's our people who have, like, I'm it's president of the board, which is a volunteer position. It's a voted, elected position. And of course, then we hire the staff for the CEO and we run the Provincial Sport Association. And then we're the ones who sanction the track meets on the ground level. So this is where the buck stops with us, because we in each province have to make our guidelines for eligibility. And you're telling us, to cut and paste what the CCES sent us, the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sport. This is what you should do. And I'm saying, well, hold on a minute. We still have the right in our province to make to make guidelines that work for us, right? And we're not being discriminatory. In fact, clear guidelines are the antithesis of discrimination, because they're actually we can apply them to everybody. And my board and I, we had a lot of soul searching for the last few years. And actually, I'll tell you this is a really important fact. When I had that gender committee meeting, I had that discovery in January 2018. And so we have 2-year terms. So my 2-year term of president was up for re-election that spring in April. And so when I went before my membership, which is about 3,500 people, our whole membership is about 3,500 athletes, coaches, everybody, right? So when I went in front of the representatives to be voted on for president again, I actually, in my presentation that year, I went through the whole policy that I was reading. I said, this is what it means. It's going to be males and female races. I went through the whole thing for them. They were like sitting there in shock. Nobody had heard of this. And I said, they were like, where's it? Everybody's looking at each other like, where's this coming from? And I said, listen, this is coming and you don't know it yet, but it's coming. And if you vote for me, this is going to be my position. I'm going to say we compete on the basis of biological sex, not gender, because that's how people have been signing up. And as far as I'm concerned, that's the only fair way to go forward. And I said, if you don't believe in my position, if you think my position is hateful or inappropriate, and you don't want me to speak as your president to that effect, don't elect me, because that's the hill I'm going to die on. That's my position. So they voted in favor, like 96%. Everybody wanted me there. And they said, we want you. So I'm actually the first person that I know of who literally campaigned on this platform and literally sought a mandate, because I felt I had to be honest. Instead of hiding what was coming down the pipeline, what I would be saying, whether it was, Twitter is my own private thing, but what I see on Twitter pretty much reflects what I think as far as my position, what I say to my board, or what we discuss. They all know that. That's my position. And so from that point, I felt, and I actually promised that I would fight on their behalf so that their daughters could have female only sport and their boys could have male only sport. And but we did have, from that point, then of course the pressure was on to say, well, how do we then set up, like, how do we set up this policy to be respectful? And anyway, so we have, first of all, we have to keep in mind, we've always had anti-bullying. So there's no bullying allowed, no matter what. We're always respectful, right? But when you sign up for our sport, and this has always been the case, Artie, when you sign up for membership in our association, it on the application, it has 2 boxes, male or female. Literally, it says male, female, not man or woman. It says male or female. And that was always there. We didn't change anything. That's always how, it's how we've had people sign up. So there's a clause in our, and then you have to sign the code of ethics and conduct. In our under the athlete section, the responsibility is that you do not misrepresent yourself. If you sign up as this, you're not allowed. So in other words, you can't misrepresent yourself in terms of saying you're from a different club that you weren't belonging to. You can't say that you're a different age that you are. So if you sign up as male or female, because that's how you were born, you can't misrepresent yourself. I mean, then we have a clause now, a new clause that basically says that we will respect whatever gender you want to call yourself, but you must compete in your biological sex group. And if you're a male, you'll always compete with males. And the key principle has to be absence of competitive advantage. So if you happen to be a trans man, if you're a woman who identifies as male, you would be allowed to compete in the male race. But because there's no advantage, like it's no competitive advantage. So you're putting yourself at if you're a female and you want to go into a male race, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage. So that's your choice.
Right. That makes sense.
But the only thing there is, so the female, sorry?
Contact sports. But I guess there'd be an exception for contact sports.
Yeah, of course, but that's not ours. We don't have a contact sport in track and field. So that would be different. Because track and field, you just compete one-on-one or like in your own lane or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so the only thing is with the girls, the female athletes could compete as a male or a female, unless they've started the testosterone treatment, then they're doping.
Yeah.
So we have a little bit of a thing about upper limits and stuff, but basically it's pretty easy and pretty straightforward. Now, somebody could come along maybe and challenge that, but for now, we feel that's the most fair, like it's the fairest and the most straightforward and clear guidelines that we can have, and they align with everything we've always done at ground level. And it gives nobody license to bully somebody. It gives nobody a license to bully. We will do it respectfully. And if they want to transition, they have a certificate and they want to make their case, they can go to the jury of appeal. We'll look at it. But I feel like we have a pretty clear set of guidelines. As I promised, right? Yeah,
that's amazing. So it sounds like then the pressure to buy into this trans stuff is coming from above, but down on the ground level, there's absolutely no support for it. It sounds
we in my province of Alberta, we don't there's portions of the province that, in the provincial government, of course, that would love for us to do something different, maybe, but my responsibility and ours as a board has to be to run the sport in a way that's fair and ethical, and with clear guidelines that are not discriminatory in any way. And we compete on the basis of biology, and we all accept that.
Yeah.
And you can identify anything you want. Like, we're not saying you can't again identify as a woman or a man or whatever. Like, we'll even call you by a different name if you want, but you have to be clear that sport is contested on the basis of biology, and it just can't be any other way. Right? It's
not pronouns. We don't split sport. Like, imagine a scenario where there are two identical twin males who are both athletes. They're both very fit, and whatever sport it is, they go up to the registration table, and one of them says, my pronouns are he, him, oh, you go to this team. And the other one says, my pronouns are she, her, oh, you can't compete on the same team. Identical bodies, identical twins, but they're literally forced to compete in two different categories simply on the basis of their pronoun preferences. That makes no sense.
But what about jure and all these new ones? Like, people won't even know what to do.
Yeah,
and,
it's just
and you know, and that's really, as I say, we have never in sport categorized or used your religion or your political, like, let's say we've never picked somebody in sport on the basis of their religion or on the basis of their political party. We don't say all the Democrats go over here and all the Republicans go over there. I mean,
right.
But that's really what you're saying. You're saying my idea of myself and my identity and my ideology and my view of my life and what I think about the world, how I see the world, that should be the basis upon which you pick me for sport. Well, we don't do that in sport. And the whole beauty of sport is that you can actually put aside your ideology, your religion, your politics, and just compete on the basis of two bodies competing against each other on the basis of biology. Biology is this foundation, and we can't deny that biology exists. And I find it quite strange that everybody will readily admit that gender could be fluid, and we all know that biology is hardwired. So why would we pick a fluid thing to base our solid guideline on?
That's a great point. Great point.
Right.
Yeah.
So
it's something that changes.
It changes. So who's going to make that call from day to day? If it's a fluid, it's like, it's like trying to draw a line in a river.
Yeah, it's a great point. Exactly.
Right. We just have to go with biology. It's so simple, and it's how we have always done it. We're not trying to be disrespectful. We want to respect people, but we also need to have a respect for sport and for the rules of sport and for ethical conduct. And you cannot misrepresent yourself. I mean, you bring a body to the competition, and that's what you're competing with. And we have to acknowledge those bodies.
Yeah. How are the female athletes you're speaking to reacting to all this? I
have a lot of people saying thank you behind the scenes. I agree with you, but there are a lot of people who are scared to death already to say anything, and a lot of people feel really uncomfortable with my dogmatic position.
Yeah, I'm so angry about that because this is sort of people looking back at the gay rights movement, which I think was wonderful, of course, because I'm gay and I benefit from that.
Yeah.
And thinking they need to do this is that all over again. And they're just looking back at all the things that happened in the gay rights movement, and they're trying to reproduce them for trans. And everybody doesn't want to step on a line. They don't want to do something wrong because there's always collective guilt over mistreatment of gays in the past. And this angers me because this is such a different phenomenon. It taints my movement. It's making people potentially start to resent the whole LGBT rainbow, because there's being so much demanded of people that's so unfair and unreasonable around T. It really. We never asked for any of this stuff. We just wanted to, get married and be left alone as gays and lesbians. But now there's all this stuff that's being imposed on everybody, and there's so much aggression and anger in the activism, and I'm just so embarrassed and sorry about it.
I can imagine. And it really makes me wonder about, it seems to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because you're part of the community, but it seems to me that LGB, they believe in biology because it's almost essential for, your orientation. And then the T and the Q is completely different.
What distinguishes me from a straight person? A straight person is a man who's sexually attracted to women. A gay person is a man who's sexually attracted to men. If you don't believe in men and women, then there's none of these things there's nothing.
So it undermines you. It undermines you.
Undermines us. And worse than that, the gay rights organizations are actively hostile to same-sex attraction. They're telling us that we have an obligation to start having sex with members of the opposite sex if they identify differently.
Boy, that gives my head a spin. I don't even know. Like, it must be so wrought right now in some of those relationships in terms of within the movement, because it's almost as if the T and the Q don't respect the foundational ideas upon which L, G, and B are based. Right.
Well, the T and Q are not LGBT. There are some gays who become trans. So there's, I think the reason T was included in the LGBT in the ring is that there were a lot of gay people who became transsexual. But
Interesting.
most gay people are not. Most gay men, most men who became transsexual women were straight males.
Okay, interesting.
This is an extension of cross-dressing. This is sort of like, it's like an extreme version of cross-dressing or transvestism, essentially.
Right.
It's like oftentimes, not always. There's many pathways, like we said.
Yeah.
So these people who are doing all of this, who are taking over the lesbian and gay rights organizations, these are heterosexual males, by and large, right? So that's why they have any respect for same-sex attraction and for gays and lesbians, because they're not gays and lesbians. These are straight men. You know?
Yeah. So I guess it will be up to the LGBTQ societies and organizations and community, I guess, if there is such a thing, to basically sort that out and have maybe reestablish personal respect. It's not for me to say, but it just feels like it feels like the community, like the LGBT community, is really having the same struggle we're having in sport, because there's a sort of undermining of our basic premises of operation, and yet somehow we're the hateful ones. Somebody's imposing a new set of rules on us, but we're the hateful ones. I don't get that. I don't understand how it's not also considered, if you're going to use that language, which I don't like to use, how is it also not hateful then to be imposing this on us?
Yeah, it's exactly right. It's so not fair. And there's another parallel too with sport and with the gay rights, is that we feel like we have to redo things. You know, I just did an interview with a hero of gay rights movement from the 60s and 70s, like feeling like we have to fight for our rights all over again because they've been taken away. And this sounds like there's echoes of that when you're talking about the doping scandals of the 80s and fairness in sport, and you just having to redo all of that, having to reestablish the boundaries of fairness. Like you just, it's like, it's the same thing. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And I've seen so many people, it's the quiet people, the people who didn't make the team because they weren't like me, who weren't willing to cheat and take the drugs. We didn't make the Olympic team, and the ones who were cheating made the Olympic team.
Yeah.
And that's why somebody like me disappears out into the Sahara Desert and has to think about it for a few years, why I even tried, you know.
Wow, that was really frustrating. Yeah,
and then so all of a sudden you see it happening all over again, and you think, you know, maybe in those days I couldn't say much, but at least now I can say something because I have a little bit more of a platform, and I have a different level of responsibility. Been around the merry-go-round a few times. I mean, I really feel like I have a responsibility to put my stake in the ground and just say, look, this is it. Like, this is what it is. This is how we compete. These are the guidelines that we all agreed on. And when we reestablished the Olympics in, 1896, this is the premise that we all used. If you're going to change the premise, I don't know, then you're talking about something different. It's not sports.
Yeah, and sports, the way trans issues are going to be handled in sports is going to have a huge impact on the way trans issues are going to be handled in other arenas, most importantly, women's safe spaces. Because if we can firmly establish, and I think that's why there's trans activists are attacking sports so much, because if they can establish that males can compete even in women's sports on the basis of pronoun, then they can do anything, you know? As fun as your sport, which is all about physical bodies, you can cross over legally, then you can do it anywhere. You know, there's nothing stopping you from being a gynecologist or a rape crisis counselor or any role that is very, very necessary for, for women to have.
And I guess I see that. I've had a lot of people tell me sport is kind of like the tip of the spear in this kind of a struggle, only because it's sort of like you're the most obvious. It's the most obvious realm. And maybe it's even helpful because there's not quite as much at stake. Like, if sport disappeared from society, we wouldn't all drop dead. I mean, it's not absolutely necessary, but it's a huge endeavor that we all love. It's a traditional thing we do, lots of fun, and it really, there's a lot of value in, again, the character development of especially for women. Well, I could say either or, but I mean, women who learn how to compete. It does a lot for their character to be able to stand on their own 2 feet in life. And I really feel like it's really helped me, having been an athlete, to be able to be a leader, to make decisions, to you know, you go up against something, you're willing to put a stake in the ground and say, look, oh, you know, I might win, I might lose, but this is what I have to do. And there's a value in that. And I think, you know, because sport is kind of this sort of extraordinary thing we do, other than our basic job. For most of us, we're not professional athletes. It's just something we do that is really exceptional, and it's kind of like climbing Mount Everest or some other kind of endeavor where you're trying to reach your goals and do things. It's a really good, very clear realm of operation where we can test these ideas. We can establish these sort of rules or these guidelines. I won't say rules, but guidelines about how we as a society should be treating this issue. And how do we address human rights for everybody involved? And I really still feel like we can actually be respectful for every single person. We're not trying to exclude trans people from sport at all. We just need to find the right way to go forward so that one massive group, which are the females, aren't getting stepped on.
Yeah,
that's the key, right? I mean, if we can figure that out, I think maybe it's a way to provide an example, like you say, for other realms. Like next thing would be the prisons. Like really, you have to draw your line somewhere, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then from there we go step by step and understand how to really apply Bill C-16, because I really feel that in Canada was a huge disservice to instantiate some sort of law without sort of giving people and leadership a guidelines as to really what it means to be, you know, what's discrimination and what's not with respect to that gender identity. And I feel like we can do it right, and you don't have to ignore the desires and the ambitions and the human rights of female persons in this country to get this done.
Yeah, absolutely. But to go back to sport for a minute, and to go back to you, I find it so fascinating that you take a very sort of philosophical approach to sport, what meaning, you know, the deep meanings of sport and what it actually is. I find that really fascinating because I've never really thought much about sports before.
Yeah.
But I wonder, do you have this very philosophical understanding of it because of the soul searching you had to do after the heptathlon?
Yeah, I mean, it really is. It's sport is sort of it's like a template where you first of all bring a certain skill. So in a sense, it's like any hobby or anything people do where you have a certain skill. Not everybody can do sport, but then you have a skill or you have an aptitude and an interest in a certain contest, and so you do it. But again, it's a lot about character building. You know, it really is about saying, okay, I have to work, I have to improve myself in these particular ways, and then I'm going to put myself on the line and run this race, and I'm going to test myself. I'm going to test myself against these other people or against myself. And I'm going to literally see how good I am. Like I really have to assess myself in reality. I can't imagine something. I can't think that I'm the best in the world and suddenly I'm the last in the race. Like it really helps you align yourself with your body and your mind and your perceptions about making judgments about yourself. Not everybody sees it that way, maybe. But I was interested when I was looking at some parents' comments about the teenage girls, for example, who were being convinced to be trans based on social media. And some of these parents, like, because these kids grew up in an age of like computer games and stuff, a lot of kids who don't have physical, like who haven't been outdoors and have actually been physical, really don't have a connection, mind-body connection. Like they don't really, you know, have that sort of experience, the tangible experience of exerting your body and really feeling like this is my body, this is what I do with it. And it was interesting to hear a parent say that once their daughter started like training and working out, that she had a much better alignment with who she was, like her mind, her body connection. And I feel like, you know, in the old days, we used to get a lot of our athletes from farm kids coming off the farm. farm kids are always involved with working and lifting the bales of hay and carrying, oh, sorry about that train, lifting the bales and, milking the cows and like physically like having to really work. And it's so easy to coach those kids because they understand their body. They understand what they're talking about. Do this, do that, move this way, move that way. There's this whole thing about being human that we have a body, we have a mind, and they're supposed to work together. And if we don't, I think sport is a really great way to align those things and give people the experience in doing that. And especially young people. And so, I don't know, I almost feel like it's also millennials. I feel like maybe some of them are just lacking even just that movement experience about feeling like what your body can do.
Yeah.
Right? So there's that philosophy too. But I don't know. I just think deeply about it. I guess I really appreciate sport for what it's done in my life. I got my career out of it. I got so many great experiences out of this, for better or worse. And I really feel like I want the next generation and future generations to be able to benefit from it. And if we can't keep it, the guidelines clear and simple and straightforward and fair and enjoyable, it's something that'll just shut down for, it's a sector of society that just won't happen. It'll shut down, and it's not the end of the world. Maybe like we'll still eat and go to work, but it'll be sad. I feel like we need to fight for sport.
I think people agree. And I think, I don't want to say that I wanted the 2020 Olympics to happen because I wanted more male athletes in female sport. Mm-hmm. But I do think that if it had gone through, if COVID hadn't happened, because the rules have changed, haven't they? And I think there was an expectation that there would be a significant uptick in male athletes participating in women's sport. Yeah. Is that right? If that had happened, I imagine it would have been an explosion of media.
Well, all it takes is one male athlete on a female podium in the Olympic stadium, and I think TVs are going to shut off all over the world.
Absolutely. People who haven't been paying attention are going to be like, nope, that's it. That's going to be the thing that disconnects this from like, this is just something about gay people wearing, cross-dressing, something I don't know, to like, oh my God, Yeah.
So here's what I'm saying. I think it gave us a year to petition the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, to review that policy that allows this to happen, the newer policy that they've now done this, I think, without thinking. And I feel like we're doing it to save the Olympics for them, like
from themselves. They're shooting themselves. They're walking into into a complete trap. This is not going to go over well. This is not, nobody's going to be saying, yay, look at all this inclusion. They're going to say, oh my God, you're completely harming women and girls sport,
And actually, I really feel like even the people who are investing in the Olympic Games, Coca-Cola, Timex or Sony or whoever does that, there's about 13 key partners. They're going to lose a huge investment too if people turn off.
Yeah, right now it's very easy for corporations to buy into trans because they see this as queer washing, gay rights 2.0. You should see the gay pride parades. They're just corporate parties because everybody wants. Gay is a popular brand. Everybody's on board. Everybody wants to support gays and lesbians.
Wow.
So corporations want to get behind it. Right. And then they see this as like, this is the new one. There's the new market coming around. You got to get in on that market. Yeah. So there's a lot. It's very easy. It's cheap to slap a trans flag on your corporate logo. And they think this is their way of getting popular support, of positioning their brand, being progressive.
It's going to ruin them. It's going to ruin them.
It's going to ruin them. Once this goes down and there's a backlash, it's going to harm trans people and it's going to harm all these corporations. It's just going to be a mess.
I would ask, just in closing, I guess, I would ask everybody who listens to this to go to savewomensports.com and sign the petition to get the International Olympic Committee to review this policy and to put a pause on it and to suspend it until we can talk about it further and have more consideration about how to deal with this issue, because having men and women's sports is just going to be a catastrophe.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think it's going to benefit anyone. It's not going to benefit women. It's not going to benefit trans women, it's not going to benefit gays and lesbians. It's not going to benefit sport in general. It's just going to make a mess of everything.
It's a disaster. It's a disaster for everybody. Yeah.
But there is hope because it looks like at the grassroots level, there are people who really aren't on board with this. It's just a matter of getting the higher ups to wake up and listen. And thankfully, we have heroes like you who are doing that. We're doing the hard.
Well, listen, it's honestly like, this was probably, if you had told me like 5 years ago I was going to be engaged in this kind of a discussion or struggle, I would have thought you were crazy. I would not have perceived myself to be anything to do with something like this. But when it hits you like it's hit me, I just feel like you can't just walk away. You can't stay silent if you have an opportunity to speak about it, because I really think you're right. I think it's also going to be bringing more justice to trans people as well, because I think there's some legitimate trans people who feel like they're going to be they're not being serviced well by activists.
That's
right. And so it has to be, we have to talk about it, we have to make decisions, and we have to be clear, and we have to not be afraid about what we say, because we need this conversation.
Yeah, and the more people see people speaking up, the more they will speak up. The more people see people speaking up, the more they're not willing to speak up. This is why I'm not the head of any organization. No. I'm not trans or detrans. I'm just a gay person who's concerned as a gay person who wants my voice out there. But even that, it's scary. I can lose my.
It must be. Oh my gosh.
Losing some friends. It's a scary thing. So the more voices, the better, and the sooner
Artie,
we can. Around.
You are the bigger hero than me then, because you're risking a lot too. So thank you. Thanks to you for speaking up on it. Really.
Well, that means a lot to me. Thank you.
Thank you. It's an honor to talk to you, Artie.
Well, right back at you. It's a huge honor.
Thank you.
Why don't we stop there? But let's have a chat after the recording for a minute.
Sure.
Okay.